I'm Vanessa Blake, 36, and I never thought I'd feel like an outsider in the house I grew up in. After cutting my Tokyo conference short due to a last-minute vendor crisis, I walked through the door of my San Diego beach house and froze. Music, laughter, and 80-some people spilling across the living room, dining on catered hors d'oeuvres, and sipping cocktails under fairy lights. My mother, Lorraine, stood in my kitchen like she owned it, barking orders at the staff. My brother Jake was slinging drinks at the vintage oak bar my grandfather built with his own hands. And right in the center of it all, a banner. Welcome to the Blake family reunion. No one had told me. No one had asked. This house, the one my grandfather Walter left to me, was now hosting a family event I wasn't even invited to. If you're watching this from a family gathering, I truly hope you were asked to be there. Share your reunion stories in the comments, and hit subscribe to hear what happened when I made a decision that changed everything. I didn't inherit my life. I built it. While my peers were finding themselves on gap years, I was grinding through night school while coding for a startup during the day. That grind earned me a senior developer role at Ardent Wave Technologies. I worked 70-hour weeks, fueled by black coffee and stubbornness. Where others folded under pressure, I pushed through. Learning every failure was a lesson. By 31, I was managing international teams. By 34, I was CTO. And through it all, Grandpa Walter cheered me on. A retired naval engineer who believed in discipline, design, and doing things the right way, whether it was steel cables or raising a granddaughter who felt unseen by her own family. When I was 13, he handed me a battered laptop and said, "Build something with this. And don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." Every Sunday, I'd visit him in this very house. We'd sit in his study, where he taught me logic, resilience, and most importantly, integrity. Real strength, he'd say, is doing good work when no one's watching. Jake never heard those lessons. 3 years younger, always quick with a smile and quicker with excuses. He bounced through 4 college majors, always landing softly thanks to Mom. While I built stability, he coasted on charm. But even I didn't see what they'd do next. Until that night. And that's when I made my move. Every one of Jake's ventures needed startup cash. A podcast network, a smoothie cafe, even a cryptocurrency app. Each fizzled within months. And each time, our mom Lorraine bailed him out with her high school counselor's salary, pinching pennies while I watched from the sidelines, quietly shaking my head. She believed in him, she'd say. But belief doesn't pay back lines of credit or unpaid suppliers. 2 years ago, when Grandpa Walter passed, his will stunned everyone except me. He left the San Diego beach house, our family's crown jewel, solely to me. No strings, just a short, handwritten note, folded between the legal documents. To Vanessa, who understands what it means to build something that lasts. Lorraine was outraged. "He must have been confused," she'd snapped. "That house was meant for all of us." She expected I'd sell it and split the proceeds or sign it over for communal use, but I couldn't. That house was never just real estate. It was every Sunday afternoon we spent measuring tide strength from the bluff, every tool Grandpa let me use in the garage, every encouraging glance when I told him I'd written my first line of code. I moved in within a week of the reading. I restored the place myself, repolished the wood floors, refurbished the wrought iron balcony, replanted his terraced garden following his old diagrams. I turned the sunroom into my office, but left the shelves intact, lined with Grandpa's engineering journals, hand-sketched bridge designs, and a chipped globe he'd spun while telling stories of his travels. Even after the inheritance fallout, I tried to stay connected. I invited Mom and Jake for Thanksgiving, Christmas, even my birthday. They came, but always acted like guests, not family. I once offered Jake help drafting a business plan for his taco truck idea. "I don't need lectures," he muttered, brushing me off. I even paid off Mom's credit card debt after she hinted at needing a little help. She accepted, but later told friends I was charging interest like a bank. My trip to Tokyo had been grueling but game-changing. Ardent Wave had been chasing the Fujicom Systems deal for 5 years. I'd worked 12-hour days across time zones as their international accounts director, running point for the biggest contract in company history. After 2 sleepless weeks, I closed it. A 3-year, Multi-million-dollar win. The team wanted to toast in Shibuya, but I was homesick. I booked an early flight, craving my own garden, my quiet. A glass of Syrah and Grandpa's motto, "Onward," spelled in tulips across the flower beds. The Uber turned onto my street, and then I saw them. Cars, laughter, lights. My front door wide open. That sense of peace I'd carried from the airport vanished in seconds. Cars were everywhere, lined up both sides of the cul-de-sac, some half parked on the curb, others angled awkwardly across my lawn. Someone had even backed up onto my driveway, blocking the garage like it was their own. I blinked at the scene, frozen. "Looks like quite the party," my Uber driver said, setting my luggage down with a grin before driving off. I didn't move, just stared. The house I'd spent years restoring glowed like a rental hall. Music pounded from inside, some pop playlist blasting through my living room speakers. Laughter echoed from the backyard. And in the middle of it all, strangers were walking through my garden, trampling the flower beds Grandpa Walter and I had planted together. Plastic cups littered the ground. Cigarette ash floated down like dirty snow onto the petals of my heirloom tulips. I swallowed a knot of dread, wheeled my suitcase toward the front walkway, and tried to breathe. The stone path I'd lined with lavender was now cluttered with food wrappers and discarded napkins. My teak chairs, hand-carved, sealed each spring, had been dragged across the patio into a lopsided circle for smokers. One beer bottle ring had already etched a permanent mark. 3 men I didn't recognize hovered near the koi pond, joking loudly as one flipped pennies into the water. I opened my mouth to tell him that copper could kill the fish, but nothing came out. A boy darted past, nearly toppling the Japanese stone lantern Grandpa imported decades ago. I grabbed it instinctively as it wobbled. Still, no one noticed me. No one greeted me. I was invisible in my own home. The front door had been propped open with one of my sunroom plants. I stepped inside and immediately recoiled. The air was hot and thick, humid with sweat, cologne, and too many bodies. The scent of spilled wine and reheated appetizers clung to every corner. My heart pounded. Voices overlapped, music thumped, and small children screeched as they tore up and down my staircase. My foyer, the one I kept minimalist and calm, was buried under a heap of handbags, coats, and gift bags. Then I saw it. A banner draped across the arch to the living room. Blake, Family Reunion, 2025, Generations United. There was even a folding table beside it, complete with Sharpies, name tags, and a guest book. My jaw tightened. I drifted through my home in a daze, brushing shoulders with cousins I barely remembered and nodding to great aunts I hadn't seen since childhood summers. Near the kitchen, I spotted my mother, Lorraine, wearing my apron, pointing a tray toward the buffet. Jake laughed behind the bar. I hadn't been invited, but they were all here. I spotted my mother in the kitchen, Lorraine, 62, looking 10 years younger with freshly curled hair and a new floral print dress I'd never seen. A white and gold corsage was pinned near her shoulder, like this was some kind of gala. She was wearing my apron, waving 2 women, clearly catering staff, toward the pantry and instructing them on where to find extra platters. When she turned and saw me, her smile faltered. Not in surprise or happiness. It was irritation. "Vanessa, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Tokyo until Sunday. Not a welcome home, not a we missed you." Just a frown that I'd shown up 2 days early to my own house. I stared at her. "I live here, Mom. What is all this?" "It's the Blake family reunion," she said, as if that explained everything. "We've been planning it for months." "Planning it? In my house? Without even telling me?" She waved a hand like I was overreacting. "You're always working, Vanessa, and you keep saying this place is too big for just one person." That was a lie. I had never said that. If anything, I'd been explicit about setting boundaries, especially after Jake had once used the backyard for a pool party without asking. Before I could respond, he appeared, carrying a tray of empty glasses. Jake, now 31, still wore that easygoing grin that bailed him out of every scrape since kindergarten. He had on a crisp blue button-down with Blake Family Reunion, host embroidered on the pocket like he was the master of ceremonies. "Oh, hey," he said, glancing at me like I was a neighbor stopping by. Didn't expect you back so soon? The casual tone infuriated me. How did you even get in? He shrugged. Mom had the emergency key. Chill. Everything's under control. We hired cleaners for tomorrow. I looked around in disbelief. My home had been hijacked, floors scratched, furniture rearranged, heirlooms manhandled. My grandmother's antique desk, a mahogany beauty from the 1800s, had been shoved aside and was now littered with wine glasses, condensation pooling into rings across the delicate inlay. Then a man I didn't recognize approached. Late 60s, wearing a name tag that read, Tom. Cousin, maybe. He squinted at me. You look familiar. Mabel's side or Richard's? I didn't smile. I'm Vanessa Blake. This is my house. His brows lifted. Oh, Walter's granddaughter? The one who got the house? Got the house. Like I'd won it on a talk show. No, I said, voice flat. The one who earned it. Yes. I own this house, I said firmly. The man gave a polite smile. Well, it's nice of you to host everyone. Beautiful place. Then he added, should have been split among the family, though, if you ask me. Lot of folks were surprised Walter left it all to one person. Before I could respond, he wandered off, leaving me standing there, jaw clenched. I pushed through the crowd, overhearing snippets that stung more than they should have. She barely comes to family things anyway. Always too busy with work. She doesn't even know half of us? What's she need all this space for? I stopped short when I saw a set of framed family photos on the console table. Photos that had been in a storage box in the attic. My storage box. I followed the hallway to my office and froze. My laptop had been moved. In its place stood a dessert table, loaded with cupcakes and a chocolate fountain. My personal space, my sanctuary, completely overtaken. In the dining room, I spotted a pile of matching t-shirts. Blake Family Reunion, 2025. Printed across the front with a date, 3 weeks ago. This hadn't been last minute. It had been planned for nearly a month, without a single word to me. My mind raced. I needed air. I stepped out onto the back porch and found it taken over by a group of teenagers glued to their phones. One of them muttered, "This is so lame," while another complained about missing a beach party. I stood there a moment longer, then turned around and walked back through the house, past my mother, Lorraine, laughing for a photo between two second cousins from Chicago, past Jake, still behind the bar, charming a group of young relatives like he was some kind of celebrity, past people whose names I didn't know and who clearly didn't know or care that this was my home. No one looked up when I picked up my suitcase from the foyer. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I made it halfway down the street before my vision blurred. I pulled out my phone, found a Marriott downtown, and booked the first room available. I couldn't stay. I couldn't play hostess. And I couldn't pretend this was normal. As the Uber pulled away, I looked back at the glowing windows of the house Grandpa Walter left to me. It didn't feel like mine anymore. The hotel room was cold, sterile, beige walls, generic art, stiff sheets. But it was quiet, and no one there had stolen a piece of me. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for nearly an hour, replaying everything like a bad film I couldn't shut off. My mother and brother had dismissed me before, but never this blatantly. This was different. This was deliberate. As the numbness wore off, old memories surfaced like bruises coming to light. My 8th birthday, when Lorraine invited my entire class but forgot to order a cake I wasn't allergic to. "Oh, Vanessa, don't make a scene. The other kids are enjoying themselves." My high school graduation, Jake had a baseball game that day. They arrived halfway through the ceremony and left before my name was even called. "It's the semifinals, Vanessa. You're just walking across the stage. We'll see the pictures." And then the scholarship, a competitive engineering grant I worked my entire senior year to earn. When I told her, Lorraine simply frowned and asked if I'd thought about going into event planning instead. Something more feminine. Meanwhile, Jake's half-finished classes and forgotten business ideas were celebrated. Funded. Framed as exploration. My accomplishments were ignored or reframed as inconveniences. By midnight, I couldn't sit with it alone anymore. I called Hannah, my best friend since middle school. She'd witnessed my family dynamic for over 2 decades, and she never held back. "They did what?" she practically shouted when I told her what had happened. "In your house? Without telling you?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Am I overreacting?" "Overreacting?" She barked a dry laugh. "Vanessa, if anything, you're underreacting. They used your property like a banquet hall, trashed your home, and didn't even invite you. That's not a misunderstanding. That's disrespect, plain and simple." Her words hit like truth usually does. Harsh, but clarifying. This wasn't just about the reunion. It was about a lifetime of being disregarded, talked over, expected to shrink so Jake could shine. I'd offered understanding. I'd offered support. And they'd taken, again and again. I barely slept. My mind circled through every option. Confrontation. They'd deflect. Request an apology. It'd be shallow. Try to explain my feelings. I'd be told I was too sensitive. By morning, I wasn't confused anymore. I was done. At 9 a.m., I returned to the house. The cars were gone, but the aftermath was worse than I imagined. Empty wine bottles cluttered my counters. My antique Persian rugs were matted with ground-in food. Someone had vomited in the powder room sink. Folding chairs were haphazardly stacked by the fireplace. And the tulip garden? Flattened. Lorraine sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with a mug of coffee, completely unfazed. Like this was normal, like nothing had happened. Lorraine looked up as I stepped into the kitchen. "There you are," she said, like I was late for brunch. "Where'd you run off to last night?" "So dramatic, Vanessa." No apology, no acknowledgement of the violation. Just more of the same. I was the problem. "I stayed at a hotel," I replied, keeping my voice steady, since my bedroom was apparently turned into a coat check room. "Oh, that was Jake's idea," she said, waving it off. "We needed the space. You know how these things go. Besides, the cleaning crew's coming at noon." "That's not the point, Mom," I said, more sharply now. "You used my home without asking. You didn't even tell me about this reunion. You didn't invite me." She sighed, annoyed. "You're always working. Would you have even come? You'd just have had a million rules. You're so particular about everything." "Yes," I said, "because it's my house. Setting boundaries for my own property isn't controlling. It's normal." Jake wandered out of the guest room then, wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt, hair a mess. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee. "Great party, right? Everyone loved the place." "Jake," I said, trying to stay calm, "why didn't you tell me about this?" He shrugged. "We needed a big spot, and you've got all this room. It just made sense." "What's the big deal? We're family." I stared at him. "The big deal is that this is my home, not a rental, not a clubhouse. You don't get to use it without my permission," Lorraine cut in. "Technically, it's the family home. Your grandfather would have wanted everyone to enjoy it." And that was it, the final push. "Don't you dare tell me what Grandpa Walter would have wanted," I snapped. "He left this house to me because he knew I would honor it. He knew I'd protect it." I turned away before I exploded and walked through the house, taking in the aftermath. When I reached the study, I stopped cold. His antique mahogany desk, the one he'd called an example of real craftsmanship, had a deep gouge across its top, and a faint, ugly burn mark, like someone had set down a lit cigarette. He'd taught me to draw blueprints at that desk. It's where he'd written my college recommendations, where he'd typed his will, and someone had disrespected it like it was just a drink table. I stormed toward my home office. The door, always locked, now stood ajar. Someone had broken in. Drawers were open, files shifted. My laptop moved. They hadn't just disrespected my home. They'd invaded my life. The framed first dollar I'd earned freelancing during college, once proudly displayed in my hallway, had been taken down. The frame was cracked, the glass chipped. Upstairs was no better. My bedroom door, which had a sign clearly marked private, "Please keep closed," had been opened. My closet door hung slightly ajar. Dresser drawers weren't fully shut. Someone had rummaged through my personal space. Downstairs, I found Lorraine and Jake chatting casually in the kitchen, laughing about someone named Cousin Phil, apparently the karaoke star of the night, as if nothing had happened. My office was broken into, I said flatly. My bedroom was entered. Grandpa's desk is damaged. Jake barely looked up. Oh, some of the kids were playing hide and seek, he said, waving his hand like that explained everything. That desk thing? Probably just a water ring. It'll buff out. It's a cigarette burn and a knife scratch, I snapped. It's a 200-year-old desk. Lorraine sighed like I just complained about a dirty dish. You're always so dramatic about things, Vanessa. It's just stuff. Just stuff. Those two words echoed in my head like a slammed door. To them, the house was furniture and square footage. Nothing more. But to me, this house was sacred. It was where I healed from college breakdowns, where I celebrated job promotions, where Grandpa Walter whispered wisdom over coffee. This wasn't just stuff. It was my sanctuary. And they trampled it. I pulled out my phone and texted Hannah. Can you come over? I need backup. While waiting, I walked room to room, documenting every scrape, stain, and violation. When Hannah arrived and took one look at the house, her face fell. This is worse than I imagined, she whispered, hugging me tightly. What are you going to do? I looked around, trying to connect with the home I'd once cherished, but it felt changed, compromised, tainted. I don't know yet, I said slowly. But I do know I can't pretend this is normal anymore. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my phone. Then I made the call. Scott? It's Vanessa Blake. That offer you mentioned last month. On the house. Is it still on the table? From the kitchen, I heard a pause in conversation. Lorraine and Jake went quiet, clearly catching enough of my voice to realize what was happening. For the first time since I'd come home, they were silent. Scott Reynolds, a real estate agent who'd courted this property for years, arrived within the hour. He stepped through the front door, gaze sweeping over the chaos. This isn't how I remember the place, he said gently, eyeing the wine-stained wallpaper. Family gathering, I replied dryly. Let's talk in the garden. We sat at the wrought iron table, one of the only untouched spaces left. Scott opened his leather portfolio and got straight to business, which I appreciated. The cash buyer I mentioned before is still very interested, he said. Victor Zhang. He's a tech entrepreneur, just relocated here from Seattle. Seattle? I asked, curious. Yep, Scott nodded. He's been actively searching for a historic property in this neighborhood, loves the coastal architecture, and wants something with heritage. What's his timeline? He's motivated, Scott replied. Currently renting a short-term place in La Jolla. Wants to settle as soon as possible. He can close as fast as you're ready with paperwork. And he understands this is an as-is sale? I'm not fixing anything. At this price point and with his renovation plans? Absolutely, Scott said. He's buying for the location, not the Polish. I took a slow breath, my eyes drifting toward the garden gate. The wind rustled through what was left of the tulips. What's his offer? $2.1 million. Cash? Scott said. Slightly below full market value for this area, but no contingencies, no financing delays, no inspections. You could have this wrapped in days. A strange sense of calm washed over me. I nodded. I want to move forward. Scott blinked, trying to temper his excitement. Are you sure? This house has been in your family for generations. I'm sure, I said quietly. That's exactly why I'm making this decision. From the patio, I could see Lorraine and Jake through the kitchen window, locked in animated conversation. I didn't need to hear them to know they were speculating about Scott's presence. How quickly can we draw up the paperwork? I'll have preliminary docs ready this afternoon, Scott promised. Full contract by the end of the day. If Victor agrees to expedite, we can close by next week. Perfect. I'll need a good real estate attorney, someone who can move fast. Scott made a call, and by 2 p.m., Diane Matthews arrived. I'd worked with her before when drafting my will and power of attorney. She was sharp, discreet, and exactly who I needed. While Scott reviewed documents in my battered study, Diane and I sat in the garden. Are you certain, Vanessa? She asked. Quick sales usually benefit the buyer more than the seller. I understand that, I said. But my situation changed. The price is fair for what I need now. Speed, peace, closure. She watched me carefully. This isn't like you. You're usually meticulous. Sometimes clarity strikes all at once, I replied. This house? It used to feel like a blessing. Now, it's just a weight. By late afternoon, I'd signed the preliminary paperwork and authorized Scott to present Victor the formal offer. Lorraine and Jake had been watching from the house, keeping their distance once Scott and Diane arrived. For the first time since the reunion began, they were quiet. That changed the moment Scott left. "What was that about?" my mother demanded, marching into the garden where I sat beside Diane, reviewing the preliminary documents. "Business," I replied evenly. Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of business needs a real estate agent here? At our family home?" The way she hit the word family was deliberate. I looked up calmly. "This is Diane Matthews, my attorney, and I'm selling the house." Her face froze. "You're what?" "The buyer is prepared to close quickly. I'll need you and Jake to remove any of your belongings by tomorrow evening." For a moment, there was only silence, like the pause before an earthquake. Then the eruption. "You can't be serious," Lorraine finally burst out. "This is impulsive, even for you." Jake stepped forward. "Come on, Vanessa. You're overreacting about the party. We said we were sorry." "Neither of you actually apologized," I said. "And this isn't about just the party. This is about boundaries. Boundaries you've crossed and refused to acknowledge. So you're punishing us by selling Grandpa's house?" Lorraine's voice cracked with outrage. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm making a decision that makes sense for my life, for my peace." Jake's voice hardened. "We're not letting you do this. Grandpa would never want you to sell." I met his glare. "Grandpa trusted me to make the right decisions. That's why he left the house to me, not to the family." Lorraine changed tone immediately, her voice going syrupy. "Vanessa, sweetheart, you're upset. I understand. What we did, it was thoughtless. But selling this house? You'll regret that for the rest of your life. Let's take some time. Talk this through." It was the same old cycle. Minimize, deflect, and offer fake compromise once control slipped. Not this time. "The decision is already made," I said. "I've signed the preliminary agreement. Mr. Zhang has verbally confirmed he's sending back the contract tonight." Diane, ever composed, looked up. "Mrs. Blake, this transaction is proceeding. Your daughter is within full legal rights to sell her property. I recommend using this time to make your arrangements." My mother stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Where are we supposed to go on such short notice?" The guilt trip was so blatant I nearly laughed. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, standing. "After all, according to you, it's just stuff, right? If you've ever had to stand your ground against the very people who should have protected it, go ahead and subscribe, because the next part of this story, it's where everything changes. The same place you were living before you decided to move in here without asking," I said evenly. "Your apartment, the one I've been helping you pay for." Jake stepped closer, his voice suddenly darker. "I could contest Grandpa's will, you know. Say he was manipulated or not in his right mind." Before I could respond, Diane stood up calmly. "That won't be possible, Mr. Blake. The deadline to contest the will passed 18 months ago, and I personally conducted the testamentary capacity assessment prior to Mr. Walter signing. Any claim now would be legally frivolous." Jake didn't answer. That night, I didn't waste energy on another fight. I spent the evening quietly, methodically packing what truly mattered. My grandfather's collection of first edition engineering books, framed photos from quieter, better years. The small cedar box filled with handwritten letters he'd sent me throughout college. His silver pocket watch, the fountain pen he'd used to sign the final version of his will. The antique desk stayed behind, damaged beyond what I could safely move and too emotionally heavy to keep. Maybe Victor Zhang would restore it, or maybe he'd swap it for something sleek and modern. Either way, I'd learned something important. The memories weren't tied to the objects. They lived in me. Lorraine made several final attempts to sway me, cycling through guilt, then anger, then tearful promises to do better. Jake wavered between threats and weak offers of compromise. But I didn't budge. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. By midnight, my essentials were packed neatly into my car. I'd already booked a month-long stay at a quiet, extended-stay hotel nearby. Just long enough to breathe, to reset. Before leaving, I walked through each room. Not to say goodbye, but to let go. Each space held echoes of my past. Yes, but the love, the learning, the laughter that traveled with me. As I opened the front door, Lorraine stood in the foyer. One last plea, locked and loaded. "If you go through with this, Vanessa," she said softly, "you're tearing this family apart." I paused and met her gaze. "You can't tear apart something that was never whole to begin with." I slept deeply that night, for the first time in months. The next morning dawned bright and clear. By 8 a.m., I returned to the house. Victor Zhang and his assistant were already waiting at the gate. Scott greeted me warmly and made the introductions. Victor looked to be in his early 40s, thoughtful and calm. "Thank you for expediting the process, Ms. Blake," he said. "I understand this property carries a great deal of personal history." "Please," I said with a small smile, "call me Vanessa." "Yes, the house has history," I said, "but it's ready for a new chapter." Victor nodded with quiet understanding. We walked through the house together. I didn't try to mask the damage left behind by the reunion. Empty wine bottles, scratched floors, water-stained wallpaper. To his credit, Victor didn't flinch. He didn't try to renegotiate or question his decision. "The bones are magnificent," he said, admiring the original crown molding in the living room. "You just can't build character like this anymore." In Grandpa Walter's study, he stopped beside the antique desk. "This is unfortunate," he murmured, running his hand gently over the scratched surface. "American Empire, circa 1830." I nodded. It was his favorite piece. Victor looked up. "I know a restoration expert who specializes in period furniture. If you're not planning to take it, I'd be honored to restore it properly." That simple gesture, respecting what the desk stood for, meant more than I could say. We wrapped up the walkthrough and returned to the dining room, where Diane had already arranged the closing paperwork. Signature after signature, initial after initial. It was surprisingly smooth, given the weight of the moment. Scott looked like he was mentally planning a celebratory dinner, grinning from ear to ear. Then, the front door slammed open. Jake stormed in, red-faced and unsteady. Lorraine followed closely behind, heels clicking across the hardwood. "Stop!" Jake shouted. "This is a mistake!" Victor and his assistant looked startled. Diane stepped forward calmly, her voice firm. "Mr. Blake, this is a private closing. If you're not a party to the transaction, I must ask you to leave." Lorraine ignored her completely. She went straight to Victor. "This home has been in our family for generations. My daughter is making a rash, emotional choice she'll regret. Surely, as a businessman, you understand the need for deliberation." Victor looked uncomfortable, but didn't waver. "Mrs. Blake, I understand the sentiment, but I entered into a legal agreement with Vanessa, who, based on all documentation, is the sole owner of this property." Jake took a step closer, desperation in his eyes. "Vanessa, please. We can fix this. We'll respect your space. No more surprises. You can have whatever rules you want." For a split second, my heart cracked. Those were the words I'd longed to hear. Yesterday, last year, maybe even my entire adult life. But I knew better. They weren't spoken from remorse. They were spoken from fear of loss. "It's too late, Jake," I said softly. "The decision is made." Then Lorraine stepped forward, voice tight with accusation. "If you go through with this, you're destroying your grandfather's legacy. Is that what you want?" I set the pen down slowly, then turned to face her, completely. "Grandpa's legacy isn't this house, Mom," I said, voice steady. "It's the values he lived by and taught me. Integrity, respect, self-reliance. He left me this house because he trusted my judgment." I glanced between her and Jake, then added, "And I'm using that judgment now." "By throwing away your family?" Lorraine shot back, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her cheeks. "No," I said, "by recognizing that family is supposed to support each other, Respect each other, not use one another like tools. I looked directly at her. You've had years, countless opportunities to treat me like a valued family member. But time after time, you treated me as an afterthought. Or worse, a bank account. Jake took a step forward, his tone darker now. If you do this, he said coldly, don't expect us to be there when you realize what a mistake you've made. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The boy I once helped with homework, the teenager I drove to school, the man whose bail I paid, whose failed ventures I funded. I felt sadness, yes, but more than that, I felt release. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Diane, ever composed, broke the tension. If we could proceed, Mr. Zhang is on a schedule. Lorraine made one final plea, her voice soft, desperate. Vanessa, please. We can start over. I see now. I understand how you feel. But the words rang hollow. I'd heard them before. Apologies made only when the consequences arrived. I signed the final documents. Victor Zhang handed over a cashier's check for the down payment. The remainder would be wired once the deed recorded. We shook hands. Just like that, the house that had belonged to my family for 3 generations was no longer mine. No dramatic music, no lightning in the distance, just the quiet shuffling of papers and the soft click of briefcases closing. Victor approached me afterward. I want you to know, I'll honor this home story. I'm not going to gut it or tear it down. Thank you, I said quietly. That means more than you know. I handed him the house keys, the same ones Grandpa Walter had placed in my palm 2 years ago. There's a hidden compartment in the library, I added. Behind the 3rd shelf on the left, my grandfather stored documents there. Blueprints, letters, a few surprises. You might find them interesting. Victor accepted the keys with a respectful nod. You're always welcome to visit. That's kind, I said, but some chapters are better left closed. Lorraine and Jake stood in silence as I gathered my things. No hugs, no send-off. Just the sound of a door closing behind me. For good. There was no dramatic finale, just the weight of finality, of choices made and consequences accepted. As I walked down the front path for the last time, each step felt lighter than the one before. The garden, once a sanctuary of peace, now whispered memories of trampled tulips and careless footsteps. The walls that had once echoed with Grandpa Walter's wisdom now held only the laughter of people who hadn't even noticed I was missing. I placed the final box into my car and took one last look at the house. Lorraine stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Jake was nowhere in sight. I raised my hand in a brief wave. No goodbye, just acknowledgement, and then slid behind the wheel. In my purse was a cashier's check for $2.1 million, and more importantly, the keys to an uncertain but unburdened future. The first week after the sale passed in a blur. I left the extended stay hotel and moved into a furnished apartment on a 6-month lease. It wasn't home, but it was quiet, peaceful. Mine? I opened a new investment account, allocated funds for taxes, and tried to adjust to a life no longer tethered to the past. The silence from my family was immediate and, frankly, expected. No calls, no texts, not even a bitter voicemail. It was as if I'd been erased from the Blake family history the moment the ink dried on those closing documents. Part of me welcomed the stillness, but a deeper part ached for the family I had wanted, not the one I'd been given. One that might have said, "We're sorry." One that might have tried to understand. That illusion shattered on day 9. My social media accounts were suddenly flooded with messages from distant cousins and long-lost aunts. Outrage, accusations, disappointment. I'd sold out the family legacy, they said, overreacted to a harmless party. According to their version, I'd thrown a tantrum and gutted the heart of the family out of spite. No mention of the broken desk, the forced entry, the decades of disregard. I ignored most messages, but I did respond to Melissa, my cousin from Oregon, who had always shown me quiet kindness. "I'm doing fine," I wrote. "There's more to the story than you've probably heard, but I'm at peace with my decision. I hope you and your family are well." Her reply stunned me. "I figured as much. Your mom and Jake always had their own version of things. For what it's worth, I think Grandpa Walter would have understood. He never let anyone walk on him either. That simple validation meant more than she could ever know. At work, I dove headfirst into the Helvetica banking system rollout. My team noticed my energy had shifted. At our weekly lunch, Hannah smiled. "You seem lighter," she said. And for once, she was right. "I do feel lighter," I admitted, stirring my tea across from Hannah. I didn't realize how much emotional weight that house carried. Not just the good memories with Grandpa Walter, but the constant tension with Mom and Jake. She nodded. "So now it's just peace?" "Yeah," I said. "When I come home now, it's just my space. No history, no expectations, no disappointment." "Have you heard from them?" "Not directly," I said. "But according to the family grapevine, they had to move back into Mom's old apartment. Apparently, they started moving things into the house, like they just assumed they could stay there permanently." Hannah rolled her eyes. The audacity. What did they think would happen? They thought I'd keep tolerating it, like always. 2 weeks after the sale, I received an unexpected email from Victor Zhang. Attached were photos of the restoration work on Grandpa's antique desk. The craftsman believed the damage was fully repairable. "When it's finished, would you like to have it?" Victor wrote. "It seems to hold great meaning for you." His thoughtfulness brought tears to my eyes, but I declined. That desk belonged with the house. Its legacy was there. Still, Victor's recognition of its importance was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. That same evening, I was cooking dinner, roasted vegetables and jasmine rice, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I froze. Lorraine. She stood in the hallway of my apartment building, disheveled in a way I'd never seen. Her usually sleek hair was unbrushed, her blouse wrinkled. She'd been crying. My first instinct was to walk away from the door, to preserve the peace I'd worked so hard to build. But something, in me, maybe Grandpa Walter's voice reminding me to meet others with integrity, made me turn the knob. "Mom," I said, not inviting her in, but not closing the door either. "Vanessa," her voice cracked. "Can I come in?" "Just to talk." I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered slowly, like she expected the floor to collapse beneath her. Her eyes swept over the apartment, a modest 2-bedroom with generic cabinetry and beige carpet. Nothing special, but mine. "It's nice," she murmured. "Cozy." "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, too tired for pleasantries. She sank onto the edge of my couch, suddenly looking every one of her 62 years. "We've been evicted," she said quietly. "From my apartment. The landlord found out Jake was living there. Violated the lease." "Of course. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here for help." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said calmly. "Where are you staying?" She swallowed hard. "A motel." "Just temporarily," Lorraine said quickly. "It's not ideal. Jake is looking for work, but you know how that goes." I didn't. My brother's resume was a trail of half-started ventures and conveniently timed exits, passion projects that fizzled the moment real effort was required. "What about your savings?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She hesitated, then looked away. "Used most of it. For the reunion," she admitted. "And for Jake's latest business idea, a specialty coffee shop." I blinked. "A coffee shop?" The location fell through. Of course it did. Her words lingered in the quiet between us. She had drained her savings on a party I wasn't invited to, and poured the rest into another of Jake's doomed ambitions. "How much do you need?" I asked, skipping the preamble. Her face lit with sudden hope. "Just enough for a deposit and first month's rent. Maybe 3? 4,000? I'll pay you back, of course." The line was familiar. Crisis, request, promise, then silence. I had the money. That wasn't the issue, but I remembered what Grandpa Walter used to say. There's a difference between helping and enabling. "I can't give you money, Mom." Her face dropped instantly. "Vanessa, we're about to be homeless, after everything I've done for you." "I'm not saying I won't help," I interrupted gently. "I'm saying I won't give you money. There's a difference." She blinked, confused. "What difference?" "I won't fuel the same cycle that got us here," I said. But I will help you find resources. Affordable housing programs, career services for Jake, maybe even financial planning support. We don't need counseling, she snapped. We need a place to live. You need both, I said, calmly but firmly. And if you're willing to accept the kind of help that leads to change, I'm here. But I won't write a check that delays the next emergency. She stood abruptly, tension replacing vulnerability. So, this is your revenge? Making us jump through hoops while you sit on millions? This isn't revenge, Mom. It's called boundaries. Something I should have set years ago. She scoffed. Boundaries. Is that what your therapist calls abandoning your family? I nodded once. Yes. And yes, I am seeing a therapist because healthy people get help when they need it. That's all I'm offering you. Real help, not another Band-Aid. Lorraine grabbed her purse and marched toward the door. Keep your help and your judgment, she said sharply. We'll manage without you, just like we always have. The door closed behind her with a finality I didn't chase. The irony of her parting words, that they'd manage without me, wasn't lost on either of us. She'd come to my doorstep precisely because they couldn't. As Lorraine reached for the doorknob, I said quietly, "The offer still stands, Mom. When you're ready for real change, call me." She froze, her back to me, shoulders stiff. For a second, I thought she might turn around, that she might finally recognize the opportunity being offered. But she didn't. She opened the door and walked out without a word. I stood alone in my apartment, the scent of cooled jasmine rice still drifting from the stove. Dinner untouched. The room felt too quiet, but not empty. Clarifying. For the first time, I had extended help with conditions, not to control, but to protect my peace. Help that could lead to growth, not just another bandage. It wasn't what she wanted, but maybe it was what she needed. My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. You okay? I stared at the screen before typing back. Getting there, one day at a time. And surprisingly, it was true. 6 months passed in a blur. Spring became summer. Summer faded into the cooler tones of fall. I moved out of the furnished apartment into a charming little townhouse tucked into a quiet San Diego neighborhood. It had a small private garden. I planted tulips there, in honor of Grandpa Walter. It felt like reclaiming something sacred. Work kept evolving. The Helvetica project had not only succeeded, it catapulted me into a promotion. More international travel, more responsibility, more autonomy. But the real change was internal. Weekly therapy helped me unpack decades of normalized dysfunction. I learned that saying no wasn't cruelty, that boundaries weren't walls, they were doors with locks, and I held the key. Lorraine and I didn't speak for 3 months. Melissa occasionally updated me. Mom and Jake had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Jake was working at a hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Possibly the first consistent employment he'd ever held. Then one crisp October afternoon, my phone rang. Mom. Her voice was quiet. Vanessa? I was wondering if we could meet, just to talk. I agreed to meet at a neutral spot, a coffee shop halfway between us. I arrived early, choosing a corner table by the window where I could see her approach. She looked older, tired, but there was a grace in her posture that hadn't been there before. Thank you for meeting me, she said, fingers wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. I nodded. What's on your mind? She inhaled deeply. I've been thinking. A lot. About the house, about the reunion, and about the way I've treated you. I wasn't fair to you, Vanessa, Lorraine said, voice low but steady. Not just with the reunion, but for years. She looked down at her cup, then back up at me. I favored Jake. I took you for granted, and I resented your success instead of celebrating it. Her admission caught me completely off guard. Never in my life had I heard my mother take responsibility, let alone acknowledge a pattern. What brought this on? I asked cautiously. Reality, she said, offering a sad smile. When you lose everything, things become clearer. And I had a good teacher. What do you mean? Your grandfather, she said softly. After you sold the house, I was furious. I went to visit Walter's grave. I don't know. Maybe to complain about you. She chuckled dryly, then shook her head. While I was standing there, I remembered something he used to say to me when I was a teenager. Lorraine, life doesn't owe you a damn thing. It's what you build with your own two hands that matters. Her voice wavered. And I realized I stopped building a long time ago. I kept expecting things to come from your father, from my parents, from you. That's not the example I should have set. The conversation wasn't easy. Old tensions still simmered beneath the surface, ready to flare. But there was something honest in her words that hadn't existed between us in decades. I can't change the past, she said as we stood to leave. But I'd like to try for a better future, if you're willing. I didn't offer hollow promises. I wasn't that person anymore. I'm open to trying, I said. One step at a time. Trust takes work. We started small, monthly dinners. Just us, in neutral places. Eventually, Jake joined when he showed genuine effort to grow. Our first holiday meal together was in a quiet bistro near the bay. No family drama, no grand expectations. Just food, conversation, space to breathe. My relationship with Jake evolved more slowly. His resentment had deeper roots. His entitlement, harder to unlearn. But necessity has a way of forcing growth. That job at the hardware store? It sparked something in him. By spring, he'd earned a contractor's license and launched a small handyman business. I like fixing things, he told me one day, shoulders less slouched than I remembered. There's something satisfying about taking what's broken and making it work again. I didn't point out the metaphor. He'd find it himself when he was ready. Not every family tie was restored. Some relatives clung to their villain story, painting me as the selfish woman who sold the legacy. I let them. I had made peace with the truth. And that was enough. I came to understand something powerful. I couldn't control how others saw my choices. What I could control was how I lived with them. So I focused on building something new, something mine, a chosen family, friends who respected my boundaries, colleagues who valued my work, neighbors who greeted me by name and sometimes dropped off homegrown lemons or invited me to block parties. Hannah remained my constant, but my circle expanded with people who brought light, not chaos, into my life. 6 months turned into a year. One afternoon, I received an email from Victor Zhang. Attached were photos of the fully restored Blake house. He'd honored the history while upgrading the essentials, wiring, plumbing, insulation, all while maintaining the original architectural charm. My grandfather's desk sat proudly in the study, fully restored, polished to a warm gleam. The garden had been replanted in line with the historical plans, including the tulip pattern that, when viewed from above, still spelled onward. Your grandfather's legacy lives on, Victor had written. Different, but honored. His words hit deeper than I expected. They captured the truth I'd been learning over the past year. My grandfather's legacy wasn't confined to that house. It was in me, in my ability to set boundaries, in the strength it took to let go of what no longer honored his values, or mine. On the 1-year anniversary of the sale, I invited Lorraine and Jake over for dinner. It was their first time visiting my townhouse. The night wasn't perfect. Conversation occasionally stumbled. Old reflexes flared now and then. But we shared a meal, and more importantly, we shared honesty. There was laughter, curiosity, a foundation, shaky, maybe, but real. As they prepared to leave, my mother lingered at the door. She glanced at the blooming tulips in my front planter. You know, she said quietly, I think your grandfather would be proud of you. I raised an eyebrow. For selling his house? She shook her head. For having the courage to make hard choices. Walter never took the easy road either. Her words were a quiet balm, one I hadn't realized I still needed. Later that night, I sat alone in my small garden, surrounded by tulips glowing under soft porch light. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. Letting go of the house wasn't just about real estate. It was about reclaiming peace, rebuilding identity, making room for something healthier. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is release what no longer serves us, even when it's wrapped in the well-worn comfort of family tradition. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you. truly. Sharing this journey hasn't been easy, but it's been healing. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a hard decision that others didn't understand? Set a boundary with people who were supposed to love you? If so, drop a comment below. Tell me what gave you the strength to walk away, or what you're still working through. I read everyone. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because I know how isolating it can feel to stand your ground when your heart still wants connection. If you connected with anything I said, consider subscribing. There's more ahead. Not just stories like mine, but real conversations about growth, boundaries, and the quiet courage it takes to choose peace over pleasing. My biggest advice? You're allowed to protect your peace, even from the people closest to you. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges with gates, and you get to decide who crosses. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. So take a deep breath, remind yourself of your worth, and walk your path, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You're not alone.